guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video. Today's video is featuring the newest My Monthly Hero kit from Hero Arts. This is the May. I am showing you all of the items that you get with both the classic and the premium kit. I did end up using some items from the premium kit as well as some of the add-ons, but I do want to say that like the cards that we are making today, you can really use anything that you have. We're just creating a continuous pattern shaker. And so we're going to create that pattern two different ways. So really, honestly, whatever you have. But we're working with watercolor paper. So if you got the kit, then you got some watercolor paper in it. If you are just watching this because you are interested in making this type of shaker, no worries. You can use whatever watercolor paper you have. So in the premium kit is this really fun balloon background, which I love, was drawn to immediately, and it's a full background stamp. And I'm going to be white heat embossing it onto my watercolor paper, treated it with my anti-static tool, and then I'll be stamping it down in the unicorn white pigment ink. And I will stamp mine twice just because I feel like that gives me the best impression, especially in watercolor paper because it's textured. But when I started doing this, I was like, I kind of had an idea of where I was going with this, like what I wanted to do. And then I just didn't love it. So I kind of, made a sharp turn, and that's how we ended up with this kind of continuous pattern, which I think looks super cool. This is, I'm 2 days late on getting the video up. That's my bad. Life, it happens. But there is a blog hop for this, and it's still open. They're giving away a $50 gift card for those who comment over on the blog. So I will link it below if you're watching on YouTube, and you have until the 12th to enter. So obviously the more you hop along and leave comments, the better chances you have for winning that gift card. I always try really, really hard when I'm doing one of these, and I actually do a video for it, to use both the kit items, because if you're a kit person, that you may be looking for inspiration on how to use the kit. But I also try to use the other items that aren't in the kit. Now, let's say you're a person who's like, I'm not a kit person. I don't want to buy the whole kit, but I love this background. They have the premium elements. Like, you can just buy the premium elements, which would include this stamp set, without having to buy the full kit. So they really have tried to make it like where anybody can get it. So I'm using the Hero Arts liquid watercolors. In the kit this time around, they included a palette. So I do have a palette already that has my liquid watercolors in them. However, it's very, very large. And so I like this one better because it fits in my drawer a lot easier. And then once you put them in there and they dry down, you can just reuse them. Like, you can reconstitute them with adding a little bit of water. So it's not like if you put them in there, they're going to go to waste. They're not. So I'm going to wet my whole background. And again, we're going back to, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Originally, I was like, okay, I'm going to wet the whole background, and then I'll go in and I will add color to, just the balloons, and I'll kind of let it bleed out and see how that goes. I got distracted with something, and so my paper curled up and I had to go back in and add more water. It happens. So that was my original game plan, and I didn't really love it. So what you're going to see with this card is how truly forgiving watercolor is. If you're new to card making, if you're a beginner card maker and you haven't really, explored a lot of mediums and you're not sure what's going to work for you, I would try watercolor. Like, really, the liquid watercolors, and there's a couple of other companies that have them out now. Hero Arts has had them for quite some time. They are super pigmented, which is fantastic. So I don't ever have any issues, getting bold, bright color. But watercolors do dry back a little bit softer, and you're going to see here in 1 second. So I'm kind of like moving across the page, and then I'm going to get to the teal. The teal is so bold, y'all. It's one of my favorite colors. Like, it just, here's the teal right there. It just like pops off the page. It's so bold and I love it. But obviously the less water that you have on your brush, the more constituted, it's going to be a higher concentration of the pigment. So if you want bolder color, you want to use less water, or you want to do more layers. That will also get you kind of bolder color. So as I'm doing this, I'm not really kind of loving what is happening here. I'm kind of playing around with it a little bit. And then I decide that I'm going to just do the whole background. Like, I'm just going to add color wherever I want. So here I'm like wetting everything. I'm letting it spread. And I'm just going to add color wherever I want. Now, remember, I said that teal is super bold. And what ends up happening, this is sped up, obviously, what ends up happening is the teal kind of takes over the card, which I didn't really love. Even though I love the color, I still wanted all those other colors to be seen, and the teal just really overtook it. So I didn't love it. I was like, what am I going to do here? Am I going to start all over again? Of course not. If you've been to my channel, for any significant amount of time, you know that I think everything is salvageable. And so I always try to include the full process so that you can see like where we started to where we get. Because for me, that's how I learn best. So here, the teal is really taking over. I'm not loving the way that it's looking, but I'm still adding color to see, can I get this to a place where I'm going to be happy with it? And the answer is no. So here I'm trying to like just dab up some of it, and, add in more colors. But ultimately at the end of it, I didn't love the way that the background looked. And because watercolor is so forgiving, everything is still wet here. I'm just going to go in and I'm literally going to blot it all up. You're going to see it here in a second. I'm going to take a damp rag. This is my microfiber rag that I use for cleanup. And I'm going to put it right over top of it. And I'm just going to remove as much color as I can. Is it still stained? Yes. Does it look as bad as it did before? Absolutely not. So like I said, if you're somebody who is, you're still in that learning curve, or you're still trying to figure out what mediums you want to try, watercolor really is very kind to us. So now I am going to go back to what I originally was going to do. I do have the color in the background, and I am paying attention to that. So anywhere that the color is stained, I'm just going in and I'm adding that same color kind of around the edges of it. And then I will drop in clean water in the center, which will help push the color out to the edges of that embossing. That embossing is kind of going to act like a dam to hold the water in and give me a lighter center, so that it looks, like there's a highlight in the center of each balloon. Now, shortly, I am going to speed this up as well. I did want you to see, just one or two colors in real time. But I am going to speed it up because we have a whole other background that we have to make as well. And this video still ended up being long. So once I figure out that like, okay, I'm committed, this is what I'm doing, then I just do all of the same color at one time, like all of the balloons that I want to add pink to, I just do them all at the same time. And then I go in, drop that clean water into the center, and then I let the water do the work. That is the hardest part about watercolor, is walking away and letting the water do the work. If your balloon or whatever you're painting is not as pigmented as you want it to be, you absolutely can go in and add in more pigment and just drop it in and walk away. Traditionally with watercolor, you don't want to work next to two areas that are wet because they may bleed together. Typically when you have heat embossing, that is not true. It holds it in, it sets a boundary for it, and you don't really have to worry about it. Now, if you have a lot of water and it's kind of bubbled up, then you can still get some bleeding. But in this case, I was not really bothered by that. The other thing that I did is I added mulled wine to my color palette. So the purple is very purple, and I like the mulled wine, which is more of like a pinky purple, a little bit better. So I did add that to my palette as well. All of these colors will be linked below. And then you can see now that background that you know, where it's stained is very much clearly pushed to the background, and the watercolor balloons are, you know, up front and center. I felt like I needed to go in and color. There's like little bits of confetti that are in the background and sometimes in the foreground, and I didn't want to leave those with no color, so I did go in and kind of, you know, get them with the same kind of colors I did with my balloon. And then now at this point, I'm pretty happy with the way that it's looking, but I did want to add some shimmer to it because I just like shimmer. You totally don't have to do that. This is now almost completely dry. Here I wanted to wipe off the excess, and what I did was drag some really dark pink pigment right across the top. So again, even though that it's dry, I went in and kind of blotted it up and was able to get that pink streak out. Now I'm going to make sure that this is completely dry before I move on to my next step. And you can see how much lighter this is than what we started with. There's nothing wrong with this background, but I do like bolder color, especially for something as festive as a birthday. So I'm going to go in with some Copic markers and just add a little bit of shading. I'm not completely coloring in my balloons. I still want that really nice watercolor look, but I'm going to use these to do two things. One, to add some shading and some brightness to my balloons, and two, get the look of transparency that I really love with balloons. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that this is pretty standard for me. I love the transparency of it. So when I first started, I was like, maybe I can get away with just doing one color. It became apparent pretty quickly that I was going to need to blend them out with a lighter color. So I'm just going to do all of the darker shading first. And again, I kept all of the shading to one side, to the left-hand side, and then where the balloon is gathered, where it's tied at the bottom. And I'm not going to do my transparency with my darkest color. I'm going to do that with the lighter color. For my purples, I did choose more of a kind of like pinky purple to help with the brightness. I think I'm using a VO5. It just seemed to match better. So whatever colors you choose and however they mix together, like just find a marker that works best. If you happen to get some of your marker on your white embossing, it will color it. But don't panic, you can clean it up with a colorless blender. You would just go over those lines. You don't want to scrub it. You just want to go, you know, run the marker over top of it, scribble it off on a scrap piece of paper, and then you can go back in and you know, keep kind of going over those lines, cleaning off your marker until that color is completely removed from your embossing. But you don't want to scrub it because you can ruin your cardstock that way. So once that all the darker colors are on there, like I said, here's the lighter version that I'm going to go in with. Originally, I did not think I was going to have to do the yellow, but I end up getting a lighter yellow. And with the lighter colors is where you're going to see me start to do the transparency. And all I'm doing is whatever balloon is behind, I am just finishing the shape of that balloon. So in this case with this one here, it goes behind the star. So I'm adding that pink right over top of the star so that it does look like it is more transparent, which is something that I prefer. It's not something you have to do because not all balloons are transparent. You know, if you get some of those foil ones or whatever, you can't see through those at all. So just depends on, you know, what your preference is. I did not go in and add any shading to the confetti. I just did that with the watercolor because I really wanted the balloons to kind of, you know, be the standout star of the show. So I will be bringing in, I think the Y I used was Y11, and I just went in and did that really quickly. To add my shimmer, I am using the white iridescent spray from Hero Arts, and I'm just giving it a couple of spritzes over the top just to add some shimmer, and then I am going to trim this down. So it's originally an A2 size card. I did trim it down about 1/4 inch on each side. So that would be a 1/2 inch smaller than what it would normally be. So that ends up being what, 3 3/4 by 5. And And I did it all the way around the edge because I wanted it to be even. I wanted the balloons to be centralized. So now we're going to move on to the second background that we're going to create. And this is the one that uses the add-ons. So these are not kit items, but you can, like I said earlier, you can use whatever you have. So I'm going to do just a very kind of light rainbow stripe in the background. Because I wanted it to kind of mimic the first one where we had this lighter background, but then a bolder pattern. So I'm just using the same colors as I used before, which I should probably tell you. I used the pink. I used I think it's just called yellow. It might be called sunshine. I used the moss. I used the indigo. I used the purple. I used the teal. And then I used the mulled wine. And I just worked in rainbow order. Anywhere the color was not bright enough, I just went back and, did another round of it to make it a little bit brighter. And remember, this is going to dry back pretty light considering. And again, you want to make sure that your piece is completely dry before you move on to the next step, or you will tear your paper. This is the, Sparkle Weave, I think is what it's called, Sparkle Weave stencil. And so it's a nice repeating pattern that's going to be real easy for us to line up. Because by now I already have kind of the idea of what I want to do. And this time, because we don't have that white embossing, so instead of trying to do watercolor for my pattern, I'm doing ink blending over my watercolor. And I'm just using my Hero Arts inks. I'm pretty sure I used Azalea, Butterbar, Kiwi, Summer Sky, Bermuda, Orchid, and Raspberry Jam. Raspberry Jam is ultimately my favorite color of Hero inks. It's such like a really great, like deep pink. It's so pretty. But anyway, so I'm using my ink blending to go ahead and lay that down. And then before I do the next step, I'm going to show you, you could leave it like this if you're not a person who loves sparkle. You could leave it like this. And you don't have to do a rainbow either. If you wanted to do a card like this for maybe something that was a little bit more masculine colors, you can use whatever colors you want. I just like a rainbow. I feel like it's very festive. And now I'm going to then tape my stencil back in place, and I'm going to go over top of this with my Hero paste, the glitter paste. And it's just a transparent glitter, so you'll still see the color underneath it. I should have mentioned, the reason I have my stencil taped down on my sticky mat is because watercolor paper doesn't always stick great to the sticky mat because it is more textured. So especially if you're working on the smooth side and the textured side is down, it doesn't stick great. So just taping the stencil just ensures that nothing's going to move. While my glitter paste is drying, I am going to die cut my balloons. This is the Balloon Bunch Fancy die that's part of the new release. This is a great die. It's really awesome. And then I'm also using the Happy, and this is from the extra large Happy and Thanks. So it's got a bunch of sentiments that go with Happy and Thanks, and then it comes with the die as well. It's an extra large Stampin' Cut. The balloons I did cut out of watercolor paper, and I am going to watercolor them. Even though it's a die and not a stamp, you can still watercolor them. And again, I am just putting down a lot of water. There is one section where the string is in front, and I want to leave my strings white. So I didn't put any water there, and I'm just going to go in and paint the color directly. And then I just started putting down my pigment. I tried to put colors next to each other that would work well together. So like when the colors started bleeding. So I did the pink first, and then I did the yellow next to that. I could see that the yellow was obviously running into that one behind it, so it made sense to do it green. And then the teal is next to the blue, is next to the purple, is next to the mulled wine. So they'll all work really nicely together. And I'm doing the same thing that I did with the heat embossing. I'm just kind of adding the color around the edges and then adding clean water in the middle if I need it to help it kind of move around. But there isn't like a right or a wrong way to do this. It just depends on, the look that you're going for. There's a little section I was talking about that I had to just paint in with the color. And while this is wet, you can go back in and add as much pigment as you want. like whatever, however dark you would like it to be, because we do know that they're going to dry back pretty lightly. So once I am happy with those, I also did the bow, but I didn't end up using the bow. So once I am happy with these, I'm going to go ahead and dry them. And then I'm going to do the same thing that we did before with our alcohol markers. I am going to add a little bit of shading to them just because it's not necessary, but I like my cards to be matchy-matchy. And so I know I was going to be photographing them together. So I wanted them to be matchy-matchy. I am also going to do the same kind of transparency that I did before, and you can see that here with the yellow. So the ones that are behind each other, I do want you to be able to see that little bit of color. And again, I would stick to using your lightest color. If you use your lightest color and you find that it is not dark enough to be seen, then try your next darkest color. But I wouldn't go in with the darkest color to begin with. You don't want it to take over. It's just supposed to be like a little peak of the other balloon behind it. But yeah, I think that these are super cute and kind of fun. Like, it's just another way that you can take your a simple background and make it to be more interesting, which I think every once in a while we all do want a birthday card that's maybe a little bit more involved than, just your average open and shut card. Interactive cards are, pretty popular for that exact reason. Here, I did the mulled wine one first because I had to pick out new colors for my purple. Because of the way that the blue bled into it, it was definitely giving more blue-violet vibes than it was true purple. So I opted to shade it with a blue-violet. But then you can see that mulled wine, that balloon, like you can't really see it. If that happens to you, just go back in with that color and put it back down. Like I'm just going back in with the pinky violet and putting it back down. For the sentiment on the first card, this is from the kit, this Hip Hip Hooray, is super cute. I am white heat embossing that on black. I will also do the same thing for the birthday on the second card. I can't remember if I left that in or not. This video was so long, you guys. It was so long that I ended up having to go back through and kind of trim out pieces that I would normally leave in or speed up parts that I normally wouldn't. But the video was like 45 minutes long. And I was like, nobody has that kind of time. I'm already pushing it at the 30-minute mark. So anywho, this is the same process that we did for the balloon background. Stamped it twice, put our embossing powder on there twice. I'm using the white detail embossing powder from Hero Arts. And then we're just going to heat set this. The Hooray has a die, as does I think it's Birthday and Wish that are in the set, but the Hip Hip doesn't. And so I just trimmed it into a label. And again, I'll do the same thing with the Birthday later on. Since I had no idea what I was doing, this was the original idea for the card. And then I got really excited about doing this kind of continuous pattern shaker, and I didn't film it. So I'm going to tell you, you can do this with a die. I used the rectangle infinity die, but you could use any shape you wanted. You could do this with arches. You could do this with stars. You could do this with diamonds, whatever you would like. And you would just die cut the middle out, and you would keep both pieces. I use the rectangles, and if you do not have a die or a die cutting machine, here's how you would do the same thing. Now I'm just doing it on a white piece of paper, but you would do this with your background. So I have marked it at a 1/2 inch, and then I will just slide this. So I'm putting the piece of paper in at a 1/2 inch. Then I'm sliding my slider down again to a 1/2 inch, and I'm stopping a 1/2 inch before the edge. So long ways, that means I'm starting a 1/2 inch in, and I am stopping at the 5. Short ways, I am starting a 1/2 inch in, and I am stopping at 3 3/4. Now, this will not work if you have a guillotine style trimmer, but if you have one of a trimmer like this, you can then cut out your own frame. Here is your 2 pieces, same 2 pieces you would have if we die cut them, and then you could build your shaker from there. So speaking of shaker, let's go ahead and build one, shall we? So I'm using the Hero Arts acetate. They sell these in, I think they're 5x7s. And I'm going to, before I put my acetate on, I'm going to put my frame down, and then I'm going to tape it to my card base and to my work surface. This is going to allow me to perfectly line them up so that I can glue in the middle flat. This is going to be where our shaker bits are, and obviously you can see it lines up there perfectly to continue that pattern. This is a cute card on its own, but again, we're trying to kind of take it up a notch, you know what I'm saying? So with that, now I can start working on the frame. I am going to use some tear tape. I just find this works better to stick to the acetate than liquid glue. Liquid glue does work, but it takes longer to dry. So there's like this waiting period that I don't love because I'm impatient. Because I'm impatient. But you could use liquid glue. I would just put something heavy on top of it while it dries. So I'm going to remove this backer from my tearaway tape, and then I'm going to stick this down onto my acetate. Now my sheet is a little bit bigger than my frame, so that just means I'm going to flip it over and trim it. With the second shaker, I actually trimmed it first, so you can do either or. If you trim it down and you're doing the same size that I am doing, you want it to be 5 by 3 3/4. But if you don't know what size, or math is hard for me all the time, all day, every day, you can just put it on there and then trim it off. So in order for our shaker bits to shake, you do need to use some either foam tape or multiples of this frame. With something like this, where either I'm hand cutting it, you know, with the aid of the paper tool, or I'm using a die, I find it very challenging to line up the die in the exact same space. So I typically do use foam tape. This foam tape I'm using is already stacked so that there's like 2 pieces of foam tape. That's why I chose to use it the first time around. But in reality, it is too thin. The card will stick, but I need all of my foam pieces to touch so that none of my shaker bits fall out. And then you can see it's kind of popped up on top of there, but the pattern continues. I did end up having to go in and do kind of another round of this foam tape around the edge. So it actually didn't save me any time at all. In the kit, there are champagne sequins that are included. So that's what I used for my shakers, but obviously you can use any sequins that you want. I do recommend, because sequins can carry a lot of static, I do recommend kind of moving them around to make sure that they're flat. Like you don't have a bunch of sequins that are kind of like stacked up and sticking to each other. You can see how much trouble I'm having kind of getting them off my fingers, and it's just because they're so super staticky. So I just take like a little pokey tool and then just kind of spread them out to make sure that they're as flat as they can be. Then I'll go ahead and remove the release paper from my foam tape, and I like to put liquid adhesive on the back of my foam tape. This gives me a little bit of wiggle room so that if I touch down on the paper and I need to pull it back up, I'm not in trouble. It's not going to tear my paper because that liquid adhesive gives us a little bit of barrier in between, and I have a little bit of dry time. So make sure that your pattern is going the way that you want it. And I found it easiest to stand up in my chair and look down directly over it to make sure that my pattern was lining up. And then once you're happy with it, you can go ahead and put it down. So we have this continuous background through the frame and the back panel, but we have the shaker bits in between. I think it's super fun. And we didn't have to create like 2 or 3 different pieces, like a different frame and stuff, because we just used that one piece to create both the frame and the backdrop. For the sentiment, I just adhered it right over that piece of acetate. It says hip hip hooray, and then obviously I could stamp the happy birthday or a birthday sentiment inside. And then to accent this, I used the Hero birthday enamel accents. I really liked the blue. Originally, I tried to treat them like I treat my gem stickers and kind of slide my picker tool underneath them. That didn't really work out great. I ended up just using my fingernail. I'm just being honest. So I did use the blue on both of the cards to accent my sentiments. And these are fun because they sit right on the acetate, so they look like they are kind of floating. So that's the first one. Now we're going to do the same thing for the second one. So here you can see the balloons. This would be kind of cool with just the frame, or not even doing the shaker bits and just using, you know, the balloon in the background. But I like the shaker bits. I think that I think that is the funnest part of the card, honestly. So we're going to do the same thing we did before. I have already glued down my background. This time, you know, I used the peel and stick tape. I put my acetate on, but for the foam this time, I opted to use a wider foam tape and then just trim it so that it would fit. And because this is a little bit wider, I am still going to have to do 2 rounds. This one will have to be stacked on top of each other, but I won't have to do another row of foam tape on the outside because it does fit. So once I have number 1 down, then I'll just go in and stack it again. So that way it's tall enough for our shaker bits to fit and still have room to shake. Again, I'm using the champagne sequins, but once again, I've said this how many times in this video, use whatever you had. I poked them around with my pokey tool to make sure that they were flat. And again, before you would hear them, just make sure that your pattern is going in the same place. I stood up, I lined everything up, made sure I was happy with it. And this one, I did end up having to pull it off. So thankfully, you know, using that liquid glue, I was able to, you know, pull it up, no issues, kind of realign it to where I was happy with it, double check it, and then push it down. For the balloons, I found the balloons were a little wider than I wanted. They were kind of overtaking my shaker bits. So I chose to trim it right here at this like teal balloon string. And then I could just scoot the other ones, the pink, yellow, green ones over to make it a tighter kind of bouquet of balloons. And I just glued them together. Another reason I'm a really big fan of this particular die, because you can use it wide to cover your whole card, or you can trim just that little bit. I'm even curious if you could even trim some of them off to just have smaller balloons. I'll maybe have to try that in the future, but I bet you could. So the balloons are going to go over our little window. So this one, you will see less of the shaker portion. I don't think that makes it any less interesting. But if you wanted to put a focal point even on the other one, you could. There's like little stars included in that set. Those would be super cute. You know, you could trim out some star die cuts, or you could even kind of stamp them on your acetate with some stays on. That would be fun. For the happy, to get it to stand out a little bit, I did back it with kind of a white shadow. And then the birthday was the same as before, white heat embossed on black cardstock and trim into a label. Then I'll go ahead and adhere the happy directly above that. And the only other thing I did, like this one uses the same accents, those blue enamel dots from that birthday set, but I did add some white gel pen highlights to these balloons. I didn't do it with the watercolor, like the background balloons, but I did do it with these since they are sitting on top. So they both have their own glitter. They both have their own shimmer. I think both of them are super cute. One's a little busier than the other, but you get the idea. So head over to the blog to make sure you leave a comment to win. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.